romance, again, like the romance market, I think is pretty heavily dominated by heterosexual romance, and most women just totally, it's a fantasy, right? Most women would totally want a gym monkey as the love interest. And so you have to appeal to your readership, and that's why at least that one is often repeated.
Alex?
I agree. I think a lot of it is. Go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead. We're totally talking over each other. It's fine.
I'm trying to get everyone in there, but it's like herding cats. So
yeah, but I think, I don't know, we all have our character and like trope crack, right? Like the thing that we're like, okay, this is in here, I want to read this. So kind of like ties into character and genre expectations, but also this whole idea of, you know, like, oh, most romances, or like a big part of romances, are written in a certain way. Ooh, let's find something that's different, or let's add like a new element to this. Let's refresh this trope. And I think that's kind of why it's so useful. It gives us this familiar ground to start off and then grow from there and appeal to audiences that way.
I love the word familiar. That's what I was going to say, is that for most readers, they want the familiar. They're looking for, so they read their very first romance book as, you know, a young person, and they're like, oh, that feeling, and they want to experience it again and again and again. And that is why the trope becomes a trope, is they want to revisit that emotional experience that they had. And they don't necessarily care that it's different characters or that it's in a different setting. They just are looking for the emotional payoff that they're getting. They want to know that the characters are getting together. If you kill them all off at the end, that's not a romance, and you miss the trope and you disappoint your readers. So I think the tropes exist because people want to revisit that emotional experience that they had the first time they ever read a book like that. Same with fantasy, same with horror, same with all of the different genres with their various tropes. You go there because you want that emotional payoff.
Okay, Allie, did you have anything?
I was gonna say I like tropes because, or I find myself using tropes because I'm oftentimes exploring other parts of the story, and so it's easier to do that by relying on, like Julie said, those familiar feelings that we want to experience over and over again. So sometimes you rely on those so that you can do different things around them.
Yeah. So of course, then that leads to the question, you know, the tropes are important. Tropes exist for a reason. Now, how do you actually change those tropes and make them something unique while still holding true to the expectations and the reasons why people want these tropes? How do you do that? And I know that's a big, massive question, but there you go.
I think Allie actually, she was talking about her story of the prince shoving, you know, Cinderella out the door, stealing her shoe and slamming the door in her face. That's unexpected. I think subverting a trope is just doing the unexpected. Well, that was certainly unexpected. An overdramatic prince, you don't see that coming, and that's fun. That's a nice subversion. And I think that anytime you do the unexpected, you're taking it and turning it and making it fresh and new and interesting.
I also think there's so many tropes that we love that. Oh,
okay, I was just going to say, going off because you referenced my story, you're talking about we read romance not to see that they get together, but to see how they get together. And that's one of the biggest, funniest things that I play off of in this story, is that Cinderella does not want to end up with the prince. She is in love with the prince's best friend. And it's this overly convoluted way of how on earth are they going to fix this problem. And I just had a lot of fun exploring that. That I kind of, I played off of these tropes. I made fun of some tropes, and it made for a great story.
Yeah, I also think like it's kind of like this idea of, right, like we have these tropes that exist, but so many unexplored possibilities with those tropes. Like I always kind of look at hey, I like this trope, but what have I not seen in this trope? Like there's certain things that I just kind of want to see more in romance, and like the way to ensure that that's happening is to write it. So that's kind of like, for me, always really fertile ground to find ideas and subvert things. yeah, kind of going into that direction, Allie, what you were saying on what if, like, so what if we're taking it this direction, or what if this character poses like this background? Like, I kind of feel like this is why Bridgerton on Netflix, right? Like, was so like talked about because it was like, oh, Regency meets also, wait, is this a Billie Eilish rendition in string quartet? And oh, also we have all of these people of color in there, and also, yeah, we have some discussions to have about like consent and all of that. Like, so there's a lot going on. I think a lot of these tropes make us ask questions too, where it's like, hey, is this really romance? Is this a healthy relationship? What path are we going down when we're following that?
Going off what Allie said, I don't know if this counts as a trope or not, but one of my absolute favorite things is misguided, like misdirected love interests, where you think they're going to end up with this one person and they end up with someone else. That's one of my absolute favorite things. Another thing that you can do to subvert a trope is, and we've seen a lot of this lately, you either change the gender or you change the gender roles of what is like, I don't know the word, normally considered in the trope, or you could even change the setting. So for example, Alexa Dunn has a book that she markets as Jane Eyre in space. And it's like, oh, Jane Eyre type stories have been told before, but I've never heard of one in space. And she changed the setting and it made it different. So that's another thing you can do.
A thing that I saw was Nancy Allen, kind of going off of that, Charlie. Nancy Allen wrote a book called My Fair Gentleman, which is a fantastic book about, it's the My Fair Lady, only the roles are reversed, where she is teaching him how to be a proper gentleman. And it's just delightful. Everything about it is delightful, and it's super fun and very unexpected. And I liked the role reversal there.
I like one of the things where you see these tropes, and me as an demi-romantic person, most of the time I'm like, well, that's not how I would do it, as one of the characters. And that's some of the ways that you can play off of the tropes and subvert them, is by just doing something different, and experimenting with different ways of getting around something, the love triangle. How many different ways can we take this trope and turn it on its head? You have the two guys and the girl has to choose between them. Well, maybe the guys decide they don't like her anymore and they choose each other. And, there are all sorts of things that you can do that I think we're just now getting into. And pretty soon we'll have a whole new selection of tropes to play off of.
Oh, that brings an interesting. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Alex.
Go ahead. But I think that's kind of like where romance is growing too, right? Where it's like, hey, who hasn't seen themselves in that main character role? Or how are we exploring these tropes when there are other factors at play that don't make them as like straight and narrow, to like put a pun on things? But yeah, just kind of like going down that.
Okay, but I mean that also brings up I think an interesting point in the idea that people go to tropes for specific reasons. Now, how far can you twist it before you get readers angry at you for not hitting those expectations? Because people do that all the time, and you see them in very angry reviews. When you look at the book page.
I think the broadest one that you would do to break the trope in romance is to not have a happily ever after, or at least a happily for now. Technically, if you don't, it's not a romance anymore. Anybody who picks up a romance and doesn't get a happy ending, you're dead. Like, you're dead to them. And so that's the broadest one I think that you could twist. Be like, oh, the twist is that she becomes an independent woman and screws Prince Charming. Not literally, the other way. And and people, romance readers, will be upset with that. It's women's fiction if it doesn't have a happy ending.
I think it depends
that's
on
kind of like the ultimate.
How you like present it. If you present it so much as one particular trope, and then like if you have a love triangle and you're presenting it as this who will she choose? Will she choose this guy or this guy? And then at the end of the story, they all go their separate ways and there's no romance. It depends on how you're selling the idea of the story, because that builds up readers' expectations.
Yeah, I think it's, Allie, what you said about payoffs, right? It's like, how are you setting this up? You can totally subvert tropes and go pretty far with it as long as you're consistent throughout. Like if this is sprinkled in, like there are these options that are sprinkled in from like the beginning and you're following that to its potential conclusion, I feel like that's when you're fine. But again, like stick to your romance. Like overall expectation is this is a happily ever after story. However we're getting there is kind of what the story is about and what we're doing along the way.
Julie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think that no, I don't really. I think they all said it great. So
much easier when I have a microphone to just pass down, because you can just pass it over. It's a lot easier without calling it out. Like there you go. So there was a couple books that were mentioned, but what are some of your favorite books that have subverted these tropes and subverted these expectations that we've talked about? What are they, and why? What about it worked for you, and why do you think it was successful?
I'm gonna rush in.
I'm gonna be
didn't
just
go fast enough. Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
Sorry. I'm gonna be super honest. I like the trope. I do. I like them. And I read for the tropes. So for me, I don't read a lot of books that subvert the tropes because I read for the payoff that I'm expecting. I am your typical reader. I'm the person that you guys, your people, I'm who you're marketing to. I love those. And so, but there's a couple of movies that I think did a good job. I think Frozen did a really good job for subverting some tropes. The prince is the bad guy, and the other guy that you think, well, maybe it's a love triangle-ish type of thing where maybe she'll choose him. She just decides to be friends with him for a little while, and I think that's great too. And it's her sister and her, and that's the love relationship that comes to the front of the entire thing. And I liked that. I thought they did a good job. So now shut up and go ahead, Charlie.
No, that's good. I was gonna say my example is not somebody you would think that we would bring up in a romance panel, but Brandon Sanderson in his Stormlight archive did something that I really liked, because you have this idea, and especially in young adult novels, where you have like two people who are going to be betrothed. They have an arranged marriage and they meet each other, and it always ends up being like an enemies to lovers, or they end up loving like somebody else. Like, oh, you're betrothed to the prince, but you end up falling in love with the guard or something, right? Like it doesn't work out. And in Words of Radiance, you have these two characters, Shallan and Adeline, who have been like betrothed to each other, and they meet each other and they're totally into each other right off from the bat. And I just really liked that he did that, because you're so used to it being the other way. And it's like, I don't know. I really like that he did that.
Real Sanderson's a master.
I feel like I have too many. So
go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, go. I was just gonna call someone. I thought there was a break. It's hard to tell when there's a pause versus we're just gathering our thoughts. Go for it, Alex.
Okay, so one that I recently read, so I recently really got into like holiday romances over the season. I was like, okay, people, recommend me all of your queer holiday romances because this is what I need right now. And usually I'm not a holiday person, but Rowan Parrish has this novel called The Remaking of Corbin Whale that is like a gay retelling of, it's basically a practical magic spin. It's this guy who starts this like small town bakery, and he gets really intrigued with this customer who comes to his place. But the twist on it is that this customer has always been like kind of the outsider in the small town. He's like the person that everyone's like, okay, this person's really weird. Like he just doesn't really, he's kind of off. And turns out that this person is like it never says he's autistic or neurotypical on the page, but it's very clear like in his behaviors. And he believes that he's just cursed to, like, if he falls in love with someone, that person's going to die because that's what's happened in his family. So it's that take on practical magic, but it's just super cozy. It's a Hanukkah romance. You have so much baking in it, and it's just kind of like super adorably cozy. And you have kind of like that slow burn romance throughout it. So that one, highly, highly recommend if you want something super cozy. And the other one that I really, really loved, that was my favorite book in 2019 probably, is Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue, where it's basically political fan fiction. Like, what if we had a female president and she had biracial kids, and her son starts this like fake relationship, fake friendship with one of the princes of England, because he causes like international disasters. Like there was like the desecration of a wedding cake involved or something. And they're like, okay, we're going to be like Instagram friends now. And then it turns out, oh, they're actually like growing closer. But a lot of the twists on it like also dealt with like, oh, like how does this look like? How do gay relationships in the tabloids look like? How does this look like with social media coming in? All of the politics, like it played on a lot of ideas that kind of echo like current politics, but also like this whole idea of like, oh, you have a biracial character, a character who clearly has anxiety issues, being in the spotlight. And it was just so spot on, and honestly hilarious. So highly recommend both the actual book and the audiobook.
I'm having a hard time coming up with something that's been released. I keep thinking about this book that I just beta read, and the entire concept of the story is that these two people, this boy and this girl who have never met, there's this prophecy, and they were foretold that they were soulmates and that together they will bring peace to the land through their marriage and stuff like that. And the parents force their kids together. Turns out one of them is gay, one of them is ace arrow, and they don't want to have anything to do with each other. And they end up running away to try and figure out more about this prophecy and what this prophecy actually means, because they don't love each other and they're not going to get married. And it's just this really cute play on this soulmates destined to be together trope. And I love it, and I want it to come out because I want to share it with people, because the concept is just so good.
Well, I think we'll turn over to questions now and see what the audience would like us to talk about. Oh, well, I am shocked and appalled. There you go. So,
I have a question.
Sid, great, go for it.
We talked about least favorite tropes. What are your favorite tropes to use?
Oh, friends to lovers. That's my favorite, because I love friendship. I think that, a pretty face gets boring after a while if nothing intelligent comes out of it. So that was my advice to my daughter all during her dating years. Pretty face is fun and all, but honestly, if nothing intelligent comes out of it, that is not what you're looking for. And friendship matters, I think, because we all sag, we get old, we become not, attractive as we age, and the fire, it fades pretty fast, but friendship, that's forever, man. That's gonna go for eternity. So I love friends to lovers.
Mm-hmm. See, I'm an enemies to lovers person, because enemies to lovers always. But I feel like there needs to be that like kind of antagonistic but redeemable energy. And again, like for me, it's all about character relationships. So enemies to lovers paired with a good slow burn. If you're into that and you're also into like crime or mystery, check out Cole McCade's Criminal Intention series. He does this thing with I think it's like a detective who has to start working with like a new partner, and his partner is just like this really antagonistic person. We're like, well, why are you the way you are? And it's just like a super slow burn. Like he kind of writes it like a TV show where each book is its own episode, and it builds up, and like how they're developing the relationships is just so spot on. Like his, I feel like his romance scenes, like when he like throws in a sex scene, he's like, oh yeah, this book's gonna like have an extra 15,000 words because this is how long the scene's going to be, because it's all about the feels. And yeah, here for it.
We do have a question from Spencer E., who wants to know, what are the biggest pitfalls with the love triangle trope?
I know we kind of already covered this, but I do think it's how you resolve the love triangle, especially because like even if you resolve it without killing somebody, you're going to have, there's always going to be team A and team B, and that somebody's going to get mad that they're not with the team that you're voting for. So the biggest that's what I would say the biggest pitfall. So you just have to really masterly like try to get all the team A's over to the team B's, you know, before like the choice happens, to try to like save as many of your readership as much of your readership as you can.
Yeah, or just not like go for the choice again. Like I kind of do like the whole like team energy, but it's like, okay, what if we're not necessarily making it about the choice? Or often I feel like in love triangles, they're set up in a way that the choice is very obvious, where it's like, oh, clearly like you start with like the childhood friend and then the person that you actually spend a lot of time with. So of course you're going to end up with the person you spend that much time with and who gets overall more screen time. So that's like something to balance, I think, in pacing too, is figuring out like, hey, if you are going to like make this a triangle, what are some choices you're making? And yeah, are you just killing off the character? Don't make the easy choices or the convenient / frustrating choices.
I hate when the choices are, they don't feel like real choices. They're the characters that the person has to choose between are very two-dimensional, and you don't, then the readers don't really have a favorite because they don't really like any of them. And that's how I kind of felt when I was reading The Hunger Games and everyone's Team Gale or Team Peeta. And I'm like, I don't like either of them. Go off and find some other guy. Because they felt very, very flat. And then it kind of goes back to the choice was made for her because, the one guy does some stuff that she doesn't agree with and he doesn't die at the end, but then he just kind of disappears. And like, it felt very unsatisfying.
I agree with all of that. I got nothing new to add.
Do we have another question or?
A quick note to the panelists. We did have technical difficulties at the beginning of this panel, and the first 20 minutes were not broadcast. So some of these questions may seem redundant. That's why.
Oh,
no.
Well, there you go.
There you go. That's okay.
Ask Us Anything panel then, right?
Okay. Sorry about that. Emily Martha Sorensen says, I tend to feel that a lot of romance tropes lead toward unhealthy relationships. How do you like to subvert tropes in order to make a relationship healthy?
One word: consent. It has to all come back to that, and it has to be throughout this. Like, I think so many tropes are like sketchy grounds for like sketchy consent issues. Like, if that raises a red flag, that's something to take care of immediately. And honestly, the more your characters can check in with each other and kind of like deal with maybe even some uncomfortable situations, the better.
I think we're going to be seeing a lot less of that in romance books going forward, because there is this rise of like Me Too and consent and the rise of feminism and stuff, so that we're actually recognizing unhealthy relationship type things that we would have totally overlooked even just in the 90s. So I think if you read newer romance novels, and especially if you can find certain authors that you really like, that you're going to be able to find books that don't have those things. And if you write romance, you can totally write books that don't have those things. So I think we're definitely turning a leaf where it comes to that.
I agree. I was at my mother-in-law's house a few years ago, and she was watching the movie Carousel. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. Don't watch it. It's just degrading to everything. But there was a scene in there where the ghost father figure slaps the daughter, and later on she's like, "Oh, Mom, have you ever felt like somebody hit you really hard and it didn't even hurt?" And she's like, "Yes, honey, I know, because he abused her." And I'm like, "What is this crazy?" I'm like, "No, this was like a huge thing back in the day that it was." And I think that, as like Charlie said, as feminism comes into play, and Me Too, and consent, as Alex says, I think that will be less of an issue. And I really think that that's a good thing. I think that abusive relationships are not okay. There were some issues that I had in certain books that I'm not going to even name here, but where it felt very stalkerish and strange. And I'm like, what? That's not a healthy, that's a restraining order. That's not love. That's terrifying. And I think that it is important to take care as writers that you do not do things that could influence a reader to assume that certain behaviors are normal and okay. Normalizing very, 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 very bad behavior of abuse is never okay. So I'm glad that we're turning leaf. I'm glad that we're making advances, because like in this movie Carousel, being hit really hard and it didn't even hurt, and you felt the love, and this woman looks off in the distance. Yes, I know what that feels like, as if somehow she's been love struck. And I'm like, what? Yeah. That's awful. So I think that we're moving this focus. And I'm gonna shut up. I'm sorry. I have all the issues.
One of the things that I love about the friends to lovers trope is that they often have this ability to have conversations with each other and talk about real things that sometimes get skimmed over in other types of romances. And I love to see them be able to talk about anything and tell each other their deep, dark secrets. And, it leads to things like being clear about consent. And it's one of those things that I think is becoming bigger and bigger. And I like to see them have actual conversations. It's one of the things I hate about Hallmark movies. My sisters are obsessed with Hallmark movies because they're so cheesy and cute. And I'm like, but these people, there's always some random problem thrown at the last second that could be easily solved if they just had an actual conversation. And it's one of the things that I actively work to include in my writing.
Okay, anyone else want to add to that? Nope. Do we have another question?
We do. Kira DK asks, how ugly do audiences get if they feel an author isn't authentic enough for the romance they're writing?
People are the worst. Listen, you could write literally, it's so subjective. It's so subjective. You can go down Goodreads and have one person talk about how the character setting and plot is all absolutely terrible and give you all the reasons for why. And the next review is character setting and plot were freaking amazing, and here's all the reasons why. People can be total buttheads. Don't read bad reviews at the end.
Goodreads is the devil. If you want to just have a really bad day and ruin your writing career, go to Goodreads for a day and it's just the meanest place on the planet. I don't understand it at all.
I think you need to read your own reviews with that filter on of okay, this is subjective. The most useful advice I've ever gotten on this topic is that, obviously you cannot control people's emotions or reactions, but what you can control is how you react to it and what you do in your writing. So if someone legitimately calls you out on something that you messed up, maybe it's something where you overstepped, appropriated something, made something happen that you didn't really intend, learn from it, do better next time. That's really honestly what you can do. And yeah, people are going to react to you in different ways no matter what. There are people who will just 1-star review your book just because it has a certain character in it. Like, yeah, those are just things that are outside of your control. I think, like, as an author, you can do your due diligence to make sure that you're always listening to marginalized voices, specifically, learning and doing better. And yeah, if you really legitimately mess up, don't make it about you. Just do better next time.
I think this is why we, as writers, use critiquers and alpha and beta readers, because we get to see a wide variety of reactions to our writing before it's published in the public eye. And so we kind of expect certain reactions from things, and we always know there's a couple of weird outliers who don't like it because of XYZ, and we're never going to like what you wrote because of XYZ. But that's why you get these reactions ahead of time, so you can correct things before it's finished, if they need to be corrected, or you know whether something is authentic or not. And something's always going to be authentic for one person and not authentic for another person, because no one experience is universal.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Emily Martha Sorensen, who is curious about how you distinguish between romantic love and physical desire, a thing that is commonly not separated in romance.
I have to tell you, this is something that actually really makes me crazy. And I think that assuming that just because a couple slept together means that they're in love, that's just lazy writing. It's just lazy, where you're forgetting, you're all about the mechanics of the relationship, and you forget to go into the emotional aspects of the relationship. And it's something that really drives me crazy. It's lazy writing. And I think that if you want to have love, because you know what, you don't need to love someone to kiss them. You don't need to love someone to sleep with them. You don't. That's just physical desire. Love is something where you're willing to make sacrifices for that person, where you're willing to meet them, halfway on something, where it's not all about you and what you want, where it's about what they want and what makes them happy. And I think that that's something that it's important for a writer of romance to get right. That's one of those things I'm super passionate about, is the relationship, not the mechanics of the relationship.
I think a big part of it also is what cues you're giving your readers. So when you have lusty stuff, you get a lot of physical cues, like, palm sweating, or the standard like fire between your legs kind of thing, right? You're gonna get a lot of cues like that. But romantic love really comes more from emotional cues. And so you have to have those emotional cues. And it's hard to tell you exactly how to write those, because I think so many of them are situational. Like, you set up that this character really loves her library, and then her house burns down, and then the love interest buys her favorite book. So not only did he help to replace something that means a lot to her, he remembered what her favorite books were, and her emotional reaction to that, that's love, instead of here's your books, oh, your arms are so muscly to carry those in, it's what cues you give the reader through the viewpoint characters will tell you lesser romance.
Alex, you're ace like me. And I know you write a lot more, I don't want to say explicit. I'm trying to think of the word. My brain's shutting down. It's too early. Yeah. And I don't. I like to purposely leave things open-ended, because I want the reader to be able to see that there is a strong emotional connection between these characters. And that's one of the reasons why I purposely leave it out. And maybe it's just because I'm just so ace that I'm just that I'm much more into the demi-romantic. You fall in love with someone because you have the strong emotional connection. And one of the ways I do that is by looking at my character's love languages. I know there's a panel on love languages. I don't know when, but I like to look at those things, because that's how, you're talking about, buying them new copies of the books and carrying them, and all the different ways they react to that. And if your character is acts of service or quality time versus physical touch, those things are going to change the relationship dynamic and really help you connect to the emotional to differentiate from the physical. I mean, you could have both, obviously. It just depends on how you want to portray it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like to add on to that, Allie, I kind of like to include characters that are on different, like that represent different sides of like the sexual spectrum. Like some characters are like, have a lot of sexual attraction or sexual desire, while others are like, no, it needs to be with that specific person. So kind of like you, I focus a lot on like the character dynamics within each other, but also kind of like recognizing that not all characters necessarily want or desire romantic love, or not all characters immediately jump to sexual attraction. So that's kind of something that I like to really put on the page to show, hey, like romance and even like characters having sex ultimately doesn't necessarily mean they're coming at it from the same starting points, if that makes sense, and kind of like developing that as that goes. So ultimately for me, it's a lot about character relationships. It's always interesting. Like I always tell people, like for me as someone who is definitely on the demisexual spectrum, I really love reading and writing sex scenes because you get that character relationship investment really onto the page. If that's not there, that scene falls flat to me. Couldn't care less. Doesn't do anything. But I think it's kind of interesting also how much we as writers kind of infuse our own personalities and identities in how we're writing these things.
Okay, I think we're running out of time now, so we'll just go through final words. Tell people where they can find you other places. If you're interested in
Melanie, I don't hear you anymore.
You don't hear me anymore.
Yeah.
Let's try muting.
I heard
Can you hear me? Okay. We're running out of time now, and so if we could just do final words where people can find you. If you're interested in romance, I actually have a presentation I'm doing about Jane Austen's romance archetypes and how to use them in romance plot lines, and that's Saturday at 5 p.m. And so we'll go, Alex, you'll give final farewells.
Alex, did you hear that?
He can't hear
No.
you.
I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, Charlie, if you'll go ahead with the final farewells.
All right, so I'm Charlie N. Holmberg. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and especially Instagram at CN Holmberg, also at charlienholmberg.com, and on my new podcast, which is called Your Mom Writes Books, and it's everywhere that popular podcasts are played.
Hey, Julie?
I Julie Wright. You can find me on, like Charlie said, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Not very active on Twitter because Twitter seems like super angry. It's some angry place.
It's the worst. Twitter's the worst.
It is. People being mean to each other. It's like, oh, come on, guys, let's just all be nice. It's okay. Play nice in the sandbox. But you can find me at juliewright.com, but that's right now it's going through a makeover. It's having an identity crisis, so we're fixing that. But books are found in all bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, obviously, and there are books and seagulls everywhere. So,
Allie?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Allie May Author. That's also my website is alliemayauthor.com. You can find links to my books. I have 5 short stories published in different anthologies. They are currently only available on Amazon, or if you live in like American Fork, Lehigh, and you ever go to Hideaway Used Books, you can buy them there too. But I'm getting ready to release my short stories as ebooks, and I'm compiling my own anthology. So they'll be available there soon, but not yet.
And Alex?
Yeah, you can find me on alexharrow.com or Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at alexharrowsff. And Empire of Light is available anywhere books are sold, and I'm in some local anthologies as well. You can also find me anywhere around the League of Utah Writers.